Okay, all right. My name is Tova Rabunski Farkash. My maiden name is Farkash, which is a Hungarian name. I was born in Brașov in April 22nd, 1944, in a forest.
What's the town were you in?
Brașov. Brașov, which is in Romania, in an area called Transylvania, and a lot of Hungarian people live there. My parents are Hungarian, and my father, who was the oldest of 9 children, left his family and moved, his parents and his brothers and sisters, and moved to Brașov. He wanted to be independent. He was the oldest. And while in Brașov, he met my mother, and they got married, and they lived in Brașov. They got married in 1936.
Where was your father born?
In a place called Sasregen, which is exactly, again, in Transylvania, and my mother was born in a place called Kolozsvár, and they are Hungarian descent, and that's where they were born.
Do you know what your grandfather, your father's parents, what their names were?
Yeah, my grandfather was Avram Farkash, and my grandmother was Huji Farkash. Huji is Hungarian name. My sister is named after her, and she's called Hannah.
And what did your grandfather do for a living?
My grandfather he had a factory of cheese. He was manufacturing cheese, and my father's brother used to go to the market every Thursday, buy the milk or I don't know what, and they were processing cheese. They had a pretty big place of cheese manufacturing. And matter of fact, when the Nazis came into that town where they lived in Sasregen, my grandfather, who was wealthy, bought himself and the family and the town people by bribing the Nazis with the cheeses. My uncles used to go up to the headquarters and bring them cheese and wine that they have and money, and that's how he survived, and he really saved many times when the Germans came in, saved the town and themselves. But in 1944, March 9, and my grandfather kept asking my father to come to Sasregen to live with the family, because he says, he's wealthy and he can save the family. He had saved them and everyone, and the Nazis are coming in, and he'll be better off being with the whole family together. But my father said he can't, because my mom was pregnant with me. I have another sister that's older and a brother, and she was pregnant with me, and my father said he can't go to Sasregen till I'm going to be born. Well, in March 22nd, 1944, a new group of Nazis came in that did not know my grandfather. They couldn't care about my grandfather and his factory. They couldn't care about his money, nothing. They got them on the train cattles, and they took them to Auschwitz. My grandparents were the first one that were sent to the crematorium because they went crazy. My uncles and aunts, they all ended up in Auschwitz. I have only 3 uncles and an aunt out of 8 children that survived, and after the war they went to Israel. My father survived because he was in Brașov. I was born on April 22nd, 1 month after my grandparents were taken to Auschwitz. If my father would have gone to see his parents and stay with his parents, obviously I wouldn't have been here, and my family wouldn't have been here. And so I consider myself a miracle child that saved my family by mom being pregnant with me.
So your father left. When did your father leave to go?
I think like maybe 1934, 35, because he got married to my mother in 1936.
So he wasn't. So when he was a child, he was helping his father
he wasn't
with the factory, right?
But my father got married when he was 27 years old. So he was really old, for the times. He wasn't older when he left. And my mother, he was older than my mom with 10 years. My mom was 17 years old.
So your father left that area in 19, you said?
I think 34, 35, I really don't know. And he met my mom. And they
so why did he leave then? Why was it?
He just wanted to leave his family. He didn't have to do nothing with the Germans.
Well, this was 34. They weren't
Right.
occupied.
He just didn't want to, he didn't want to be in the cheese factory. He had several stores in Russia for clothing and shoes, like a mini department store, and that was he occupied
So
himself with.
how far was where your father was and your grandparents?
About 5-6 hours drive, because I went back. We left in 1951 and we went to Israel, and that was only our place of birth. We couldn't care less about Russia. We never wanted to go back. But then after my parents passed away about 15 years ago, me and my sisters decided we want to go back to our place of birth. I mean, we didn't remember, we didn't know. We wanted to see where we were born. All of a sudden, it just became sentimental. And we did go, and we also went to South again, where my father was born and where my mom was born. We went, to see the places. We had a private chauffeur that took us around, and it was a very emotional journey. I keep telling people, if they were born overseas or if their parents were born overseas, to go and see the roots. I think it's so important and emotional for everyone to see where they're coming from. So,
Do you know what your mother's, your grandparents on your mother's side? What was their name?
Yeah, my mother is younger, and my grandfather was David Younger. He was a rabbi, and my grandmother was Miriam Younger, and I am Tova, which is Gita. Gita is good. When we came to Israel, my name was Gita all the time, or Gittel in Yiddish. And when we came to Israel, we had an uncle there from my mother's side, my mother's brother, and he gave us names. He said to me, "What's your name?" I said, "Gita." He says in Hebrew, "That's good. Your name is going to be Tova." He asked my brother, "What's your name?" My brother was Mauritius. He says, "Oh, I don't like this name. Your name is going to be Meir." So he gave us our Hebrew names, and that's what we stuck to. And I have a picture of my grandparents. They were really very beautiful parents.
Did your grandmother's parents, did they survive the war?
Yeah, well, they went to Israel. I think they lived in Israel. They went to actually, it was Palestine. Maybe, I don't really know the dates exactly, but in the beginning of the 1930s or mid-1930s, they were in Palestine. So actually maybe they went after my mother, after my mother got married. My mother got married in 1936, so I think maybe my grandparents went to Israel in 1938.
Did you ever meet them when you were young?
Yeah, I met my grandmother and my grandfather, but I really don't remember them.
Was it in Israel? You met them in Israel?
Yes, in Israel.
Okay.
My grandmother was sick with cancer, so she died a little bit after we came, so I really don't remember her. My grandfather was also, we met them for a very short time.
And what's his name again?
David Younger, or in Yiddish or in Hebrew, it's Junger.
Was he also a rabbi in Israel?
Yeah, well, he was, that he was called, no, he wasn't. Rabbi David Junger, that was his name. But no, he wasn't a practicing rabbi, no.
What did he do for a living in Israel?
I think nothing really.
Nothing?
He was maybe retired. I think he was retired. I really cannot tell you too much. I never met my father's parents because obviously they were taken to Auschwitz. My grandparents, it's interesting. I met them, but we don't have too many stories about them because, as I said, we came in 1951. I think my grandma maybe died a year later, and my grandfather maybe 2 years later. We lived in a Ma'abara in Israel. They lived in Tel Aviv.
Did your father have any aunts or uncles?
My father, yeah, he had out from all his family. He had 3 brothers that survived and went to Israel, and a sister that survived and went to Israel.
He had 3 brothers.
He had 3 brothers in Israel.
Did he have any aunts or uncles that survived?
No, nobody. No, that was the extent of his whole family. was only his 3 brothers and the sisters. Didn't have anybody else.
All right, but your grandfather, his parents,
Right.
who were taken to Auschwitz, did he?
Not my grandparents' father. They died many years
Right, but
before.
your grandparents.
My grandparents.
They were taken to Auschwitz.
Right.
Did either one of them have any siblings that survived?
No, nobody. Nobody survived. We didn't have any uncles or aunts, and my father didn't have anybody from his family. I don't know how many members, but I am sure that my father had uncles, and and my grandfather and grandmother had sisters and brothers. But again, whoever they had was taken to Auschwitz, and when we survived after the war, my father didn't have anybody.
So you were born in
1944.
in March,
April
of
1944.
1944. And you're living where at this point?
In Brasov. When I was born,
okay.
in Brasov, right.
Now, whereas what happened to the Germans were occupied that part of Europe, is that right?
Right.
So where did you go with your parents?
Well, you see, at the time that I was born, my mom was pregnant, and the Germans came in. There was a pact between the Romanian and the Hungarian. The Germans didn't come in till the end of the war. When they came into Brasov, they rounded up all the Jews, and they were going to take them with the trains or cattle cars. Were going to take them to Auschwitz also. Many of the Jews that lived in that particular town, in Brasov, when it was a forest.
Hold on a second. Hold on.
Casey, there was a forest. Casey, quiet. Come here, Casey. Come on. Come here, baby. Come.
Okay. You're right. Okay.
The Jews that were in Brasov were going to be taken by the Nazis to Transistia. Transistia was the name of the place. It was like a ghetto, an area, and from there with the trains and cattle cars were taken to Auschwitz. But many of the people ran away to a forest. That was a forest fire, including my mom and my dad. They tried, as pregnant as she was. And we hid for a while. They hid for a while in the forest, and then my mom was supposed to give birth to me. She got sick, and being my father was a merchant, he knew a lot of people, also, not necessarily Jews, but Gentiles that were there, and he happened to know a family, and he took my mom to this family, and my mom stayed there and gave birth to me. But after a while, I think maybe they stayed with this woman just about maybe 3-4 days, but she didn't want to keep us anymore because she was afraid that, the Germans will find her. So we went back to the forest, and then approximately, I can tell you, the Russians came in, they occupied Brasov, they liberated Brasov, everybody went back. I was a little baby. I think, when we went back to our house where we lived. Well, we lived actually in an apartment on the 2nd floor. I've got pictures of where we lived also. When we went, I was, I think, about a month old when we went back to our home, and my sister keeps telling me all the time that she used to take care of me and clean my diapers, and she didn't like that very much. So, and then, we lived under the occupation of the
How
Russians.
much older was your sister than you?
My sister was born in 1937. I was born in 1944, so she was 7 years old. My brother was born in 1939, so he was 5 years old. And then my sister Hannah, which is the youngest, was born in 1947.
So you've got your mother and father, and your mother is pregnant, and she has a son and a daughter, and you are hiding in the forest.
Right.
And then someone,
Took
a
care of us.
stranger, allowed you to come in, and that's where you were born, inside the house?
Right. But then afterwards we had to go back.
So how long did you have to stay? When did the Russians come in and you were able to get back to?
I think really not that very much, because as I said, I was born in April 22nd, 1944, And I think, I don't know exactly the date, I cannot really tell you. I don't know why I've never looked into it exactly, but I think very shortly after the Russians came in and liberated Russia. It was still in 1944, maybe, I don't know, June?
Were you able to go back to your original home?
Yeah.
You had no problem with someone taking it over?
No, but the only thing is that, we did go back, and then other Russians occupied and stayed with us in the same, because my dad, we lived on the second floor. It was a house of 3 floors, and we occupied the whole second floor. It belonged to us, and there were other families that they put them, other Russians or Gentiles that moved into and lived with us. We lived in one room while it was, I don't remember, but I'm sure that we had at least 5, 6 rooms or more than that. But he occupied one room, and we had the kitchen, and I guess things weren't that very easy.
So how long did you stay there?
Till 1951.
So all right. So your father continued his business.
Yes, he had his business. He went back to his business, but the Russians were watching my dad, and it all belonged to the Russians. Most of the money, whatever he made, was supposed to give it to the Russians. We lived on really meager amounts, but we did pretty good. I can't say that it was very bad. We had food, what to eat. We had clothes, what to wear. We didn't have no money, because even whatever my dad had, and especially the apartment, we had to leave behind. And when we went in Israel in May 1951, he had to leave everything behind. We went to Israel, I think maybe with $40, with a very small amount of money. We went with a ship. We could have only a small bag of clothes, and we got to Israel with nothing.
Before we get to there, what was it like growing up then, after the war, as far as you went to school?
I went to kindergarten.
What was it like there? Were there other Jewish children, or
No,
not?
they were. They were, because I can't really tell you because I don't remember very much, and I never went into details with my older sister that probably knew much more than me. It was a part of our life that it would not talk too much about. Our life really started the moment that we got to Israel. That was our life. What was before had no significance. Not to me and not to my youngest sister. My older sister that was older, yes, she went to school. Matter of fact, some of the kids that she went to, especially some of the girls she had met later on in Israel, because they immigrated to Israel too. In 1951, you couldn't go to Israel. Okay. You had to buy your way.
So how did you get there?
Well, my dad gave all the money and everything, whatever he had, he left everything behind. He didn't want anything. And somehow he got the visa and we were able to go with nothing. But other people, they stayed till 1956, I think, 1956 or 1957, that you could have left the Russian occupied territories and go to Israel if you
So it was the Russian government wouldn't let you leave? Is that what it was?
Exactly, yeah. You couldn't leave.
Israel would have taken you in, but you weren't allowed to go in.
You had to be able to get to Israel.
Did your parents have any family that stayed in the same area? And also
My mom had a sister.
What was her name?
Her name was Rosie Adler, or Rose. Well, Rosie is her, we are Hungarian. Rosie is Rose, I guess, Rose, but we call her Rosie, Tante Rosie. Yeah, she lived also, and she had 2 children, a son and a daughter. Her daughter's name is Margalit, she's in Israel, and my cousin's, his name was, oh my God, David. His name is David Adler, and she's Margaret Adler. She's in a nursing home now. She's like about 80, which time I goes to
Israel. Did they leave at the same time, or when did they leave to get to Israel?
I think maybe around the same time. They went to Israel also. They somehow were in a better situation than we were. We got to Israel penniless. I think my aunt, when she got to Israel, she had a little bit more means than we did. We lived in a Ma'abara is an absorption center. that in a tzrif. You know what's a tzrif?
No.
A tzrif is a hut made out of thin. We lived there for like a year and a half, and it is one big room from thin. In the summer, it's hot like an oven, and in the winter, you got an orchestra because it's raining.
It's like here, no air conditioning.
Well, no, worse than that. No, that is absolutely not like that. Much worse than that. No running water, no toilet. We had to go, out to the toilet and out to the running water and take a shower. And obviously not too much food.
So that's the first home you lived in?
Yep, in Israel
Afterwards,
for a year and a half.
Now first you came to Israel, you came on a ship, you said?
Yep.
You know what the name of the ship was?
No. We got to Haifa. I remember that we got to Haifa. I don't know whether I remember exactly. I know we got to Haifa, and I remember on the ship, my sister and me, we were wearing, I had a picture, but I don't know where it disappeared, a red outfit, red pants, red jacket, red hat. My sister was the same thing, and ever since then I hate the color red. I don't have nothing in red. And we got to Haifa. In Haifa, we got a big box of oranges and those cuts, the army cuts. We were 6, we were 4 children, my mom and dad. 6 ended up in this hut. In Hebrew, it's a tzrif, in a place called Hartuv, which is on the way to Jerusalem, which is today Bet Shemesh and has a university. It was at that time an absorption center. And my father got a job. He worked for Solel Bonel. You know what Solel Bonel? That was a company that was doing the roads. The roads, and he was like an educated, nice person, had to work the hard labor. And
he was building roads?
Yeah. And we being, it didn't make a lot of money. We didn't have no money or nothing. So my older sister Esther and my brother, they were sent to Jerusalem to boarding school because they couldn't live with us. So they were in boarding school, and only my sister Hannah and myself, we stayed with my mom and dad. And every once in a while they would come to visit and see us, and that was a big fiesta. My mom, we didn't have too much food, but we managed, and we never complained, and we never wanted to go back, even though many people, went back to Romania or to Hungary because they couldn't take that life. But my father was happy with what we had, and we were happy with it too, and we managed, even with a little piece of bread, as they say. We had that, and that was okay too.
Where you were living, did you have any problems with security, with being attacked by...
In Israel?
By Arabs?
No.
Other people from other villages?
No, there was no such thing at that time. No, that was in 1951. Everybody lived, well, anyway, we lived on the way to Jerusalem in Hartuv. It's not far, but no, we didn't have anything. We were only attacked by animals. Scorpions and snakes, because it was like in a wilderness that they built, those huts for the people. The absorption center wasn't in a populated area. So, matter of fact, my mom was stung by a scorpio, and my younger sister also, and I think I told you the story about my brother having his bar mitzvah when we were in Hartuv. And he had payas, he was a cute boy. And obviously we didn't have too much, so my mom bought 2 chickens and she put them outside. It was on a Thursday. She put them outside, she tied them up outside our hut, so that the next day on Friday she can take them, to the shochet, and so that she can make chicken soup and chicken. But at night, a fox came and ate up one of the chickens, and we were left with 1 chicken for 6 people. And we also had my father's sister that survived Auschwitz, and her husband came to celebrate with us my brother's bar mitzvah, and they brought some food because we only had the 1 chicken and the soup that my mom made. And when my brother has 2 children, a son and a daughter, And when his son was bar mitzvah, he made a big bar mitzvah because he said that has to be made up for his bar mitzvah and for his son, and it was really a beautiful celebration. But we stayed, my sister Hannah and me we stayed many times with this aunt. Her name was Rivka, and we stayed with her many times because she didn't have no children. So she kind of was in better means that my dad was. So we would go there like for Shabbat because we could have like a better meal. And then she would send us with some food to come back and bring it back. And we had my two uncles, my father's two brothers that also, came to visit. They worked, they had those trucks, and they brought, all kind of cement from one place to the other. So on their way, they would stop by by my dad and give some candies to my sister and me. And it was also very nice whenever they came to visit. We were very happy because we knew we would get something from them. But that's how we grew up, and we never complained, and it was part of our life. But our life started in Israel, even though it was in hardship, and we were much better off before, back in Brasov. But that is part of our past, that it's not important for us. It's only a place that we were born. And then all my family is still in Israel. Everybody, I was the only one that came in 1964. Though my younger sister Hannah, she married Ari, her husband, he was working for IBM in Poughkeepsie, and he went on a visit to Israel, met my sister, they got married, and then she lived in Poughkeepsie, so we were pretty close with her later on in life.
So your oldest sibling was your brother?
No, my sister.
Sister.
My sister Esther.
So she was 7 years older than you?
Yeah.
Now, did she have to go into the army?
No, none of us went to the army beside my brother because we were religious. Now at that time, if you came from a religious home, you could be exempt from going to this army as a girl, not the men. My brother went to the army. He was in Golani, and matter of fact, he also took part of the Yom Kippur War. He was in the Yom Kippur War and was really affected by it tremendously.
What can you tell me about that? Let's talk about the Yom Kippur War.
Well, I wasn't in Israel, I was in Yom Kippur.
He was there.
My brother was in Israel. Matter of fact, on the 6-day war.
What's his name?
Meir Farkash.
Okay.
Now, in the 6-day war, my brother was not called, his unit was not called to go to the army, to go to the war. And my father is the only one son. My father kept telling him, Meir, you have to go up to the headquarters because you got to go and fight. We got to fight for our country. Now, this is my father telling his only son that he had, you have to fight for this country. This is our country. This is our place. But his unit was never called. Yom Kippur War, his unit was called. My brother was in Golani. You know Golani? Golani is, he was the infanterist that went at the beginning. And he was a sergeant, and they were in the Sinai, and at one point when all those Egyptian aeroplanes attacked the platoon where he was, most of his people died, his soldiers died. My father and another 4 people survived. Needless to say, they went through a very hard time. My brother, when he came back from the war, he really suffered tremendously because he lost most of his men. And those 4 that he survived with, they are friends up till now. They are still alive, and they are all really very close friends. But that war was a very difficult war. My brother sent me letters after he came back because I lived in the States. So he sent me letters about his experience. But a few years ago, when I went to Israel, I brought back all the letters that he sent me, and I gave it back to him. I said, that would be very important for you and for your children and grandchildren to see, because he expressed, in the letters to me, the feelings that he had. And I said, it would be so much more important for your children and grandchildren to have it than me, because my kids don't read Hebrew for one.
You
so
remember those letters? What he said?
Not really. I cannot really tell you that I remember, but I just remember that it was a very emotional letter that he wrote about him hiding and survivor, and how God, as I said, I come from an Orthodox family, how he really survived and with the God's help, and he feels he had to do it. I mean, that was part of all the soldiers that were there. They fought for our country. My family, I mean, as religious that they are, but they are very Zionist and very Israel oriented. Everybody went to the army. We didn't, but now my sister children, all my nieces that also come from religious homes, they went to the army because they have to serve with the army. You can't get out from the army anymore. I mean, you could, but they wouldn't. So, yeah, and my brother's son was also in the army. He was part, and also my sister's son, their children were part of the Lebanon, when they had all the fights in Lebanon and in Gaza. They still go, because they are younger. Sometimes they have to go for miluim, how they say that in English. Once a year you have to go to reserves. Yeah, the reserves. My brother doesn't anymore. My brother's going to be 80 years old now in November.
Did you say your father was also fought?
No.
Your father did not?
No,
okay,
not my father. Not my father, but my mom had two brothers that were in Israel. They went to Israel with my grandma and my grandpa younger. One of them, afterwards, he moved to Australia. He was in Australia. I have family in Australia. My uncle died, but we went to visit him, me and my sister. And they were in the army in the War of Independence in 1947-48. They fought in the war.
Do you know anything that they did? Did they ever tell you any experiences?
No. We were young, don't forget, we were young when we were to Israel, and just one of my uncles, my mother's youngest brother that was in Israel, he had a peach orchard. He lived in a moshav. You know what's a moshav? He lived in a moshav, he had a peach orchard, and later on in life when I got married here in the States, and we would go to Israel and take my children and go to they still remember the orchard because he had the combine, what's a combine? One of these big tractors, and we would go with the kids on the tractors and pick the peaches, and it was really lovely.
So when you left, you were about 20 years old?
Yeah, in 1964,
Did you have any friends that you stayed in contact with in Israel?
Yeah, well, right now, I have some.
I'm talking about
when I came in 1964.
I'm talking about maybe in the 1960s, during the 67 war. Did you have any friends that had to fight in the army during the 67 war?
I really cannot tell you most. I went to religious school. I went to Bet Yaakov when I was elementary. Then to high school, I went to Bet Zirot Mizrahi, which was a girls' school. And then I went to Bar Ilan, which was a mix. My girlfriends, I am sure they didn't go to the army because, we all came from a religious home. I guess the guy friends that I had, they probably had been part of the army, but I really don't know. Through the years that I went back, since 1964 to Israel, I got married in 1965, and through the years, I have met some of my friends, not too many, because most of the time it was a pretty short visits to see my parents, to see my sisters. My husband came with me. My husband was a cousin of Shimon Peres. You know Shimon Peres? He came to our wedding. I have even pictures of Shimon Peres and his wife in our wedding. And when we used to go to Israel, we visited Shimon in his office. My girls went to visit him too, my children, one of my granddaughters. And we have pictures of him and his books that he signed for us. And so my husband was the only one son. So our visits to Israel was really kind of short, to see his family, to be with me. So I didn't meet my friends too much. And through the years, our contact been very...
So where did you meet your husband?
Well, I had here a friend that came, well, in New York. When I came in 1964, I stayed in Long Beach, Long Island. Well, actually, I'm sorry, tracking back. My father had a cousin, Ben Tenenbaum, that survived the war. You asked me before if he had anybody. I forgot. He did have one cousin. Ben Tenenbaum was his name. He was in Long Beach, Long Island. And he had there a hotel, Lido Beach Hotel. I don't know if you know Long Beach, Long Island.
The what?
Long Beach, Long
Yes,
Island,
sure.
in Long Beach. You know the Lido Beach Hotel? That was owned by my father's cousin, Ben Tenenbaum. So I stayed there. And
You know, was he in a what camp he was in, or was it?
he was hidden. He
hidden
was
down?
hidden on a rooftop by a Gentile that his wife didn't know that her husband hid my cousin. I think he must have been on that rooftop for about a year or year and a half. And later on, when he survived, the wife never knew that he was there. But later on, he became one of the righteous among the nations in Israel.
The person that
right, that saved my cousin. So I stayed with my cousin, and as I told, my friend got me this job in Iraq in the Hebrew Institute, and I had a friend that went with me to school in Bet Zirot Mizrahi in Israel. Her name was Drora Klein. Oh my God, how I remember those names. Drora Klein. She came earlier. You know, a lot of people in the 1960s, if they could, they came to the United States.
Why was that?
Because it was easier life here. Life in Israel was pretty hard, you know. So if they had, I guess they had needed a visa. If they had some kind of a family here, they all tried. A lot of people immigrated. From my class in Tel Aviv, in Bet Zirot Mizrahi, 3 girls came to the United States before me. And one of them, Miriam Gross, she met and she was very Orthodox. She met a guy in Brooklyn and she married. I stayed with her for a little while when I came to Israel. So anyway, my friend Drora, I was friendly with and kept in touch with her. And then one day she says, you know, I want you to meet my friend. He owns a hotel, a big hotel in New York. It was called the Alamek Hotel. You know New York?
No.
On 72nd and Broadway, between 71st and 72nd. It was, I mean, it didn't own, there was a whole conglomerate of people that owned it. It was a 700-room hotel, Alamek Hotel. I have a picture of it in his office. And she says, I just want you to come and meet him. That was in March 1965. Now, don't forget, I was a teacher. And I was going to go back to Israel in June.
First you came to the United States and you got a job as a teacher?
Yeah, in the summer.
Where was the teacher? Where was the job at?
In Iraq, Hebrew Institute of Rockland County.
Okay.
Up in Muncie, Spring Valley.
Was that a full-time job or was it?
Yeah, a full-time job. I used to go up with the subway to 180th Street, and there was a teacher that lived in 180th Street and Broadway, and he had a car. So he would drive me and another teacher up to Muncie, and then we would come back like at 3 o'clock, take the subway back to my apartment. I lived on 92nd Street between Broadway and West End Avenue. I think it was 250 West 92nd Street, I still remember. And I did that for almost a year. I was going to go back to Israel in June.
Did you get to the United States by yourself?
Yeah.
By yourself? Mm-hmm. You're going to stay with who?
With my father's cousin in Long Beach, Long Island.
Okay.
You know, and then I was going to go back. I came for the summer, and I was going to go back at the end of the summer. And then my friend Tirza, she lives in Tirza Laufer. Matter of fact, she immigrated to Israel. She was Israeli. That her parents moved to Long Beach, Long Island, and a few years later, she went to Israel. She lives in Israel now too. And she said to me, you know, before the end of the summer, she says that there is this place in Muncie Spring Valley, they're looking for a Hebrew school teacher, if I would like to take the job. And I figured, well, you know, what do I have to lose? I'll stay for a year in the States. I'll learn English much better, because whatever you learn in school, it's nothing. If you practice it, that's when you learn it. So I figured I'm going to stay and go back at the end of the year, which was supposed to be like June 1965. But then in March 1965, this friend of mine, Drora, that lived, and I shared an apartment with 3 other girls on 92nd, on 250 West 90th Street, between Broadway and Western Avenue. I shared an apartment there, and I was going to go back to Israel. And in March, my friend Drora says, she wants me to meet this guy, her friend. So my husband says that the moment he saw me, he knew this is the girl that he's going to marry. I really didn't want to. That's the real honest truth. Today is his yahrzeit, and he knew that is true, because I really wanted to go back to Israel. I had no intentions to stay here in Israel. I mean, in the States. He was the only one son. His parents were also, they were in labor camp. He was Polish, from a place called Koronitz outside of Vilna, and his father was a partisan, and the whole story about him. His story is in the book, And so, he was very nice, and he was very nice to me, and really drove me crazy, because he really wanted to marry me from the moment he saw me. And I figured, well, he's just as good as anybody else. He was a nice guy, and he was Israeli, and he was Jewish, and we had a lot in common. So I met him in March, and in May we got engaged. It was very fast. My father's cousin, I call him my cousin too. My cousin Ben made us the engagement, and then I says, well, I got to get married in Israel because my family is in Israel. So him and his parents, his mom and dad, they came to Israel, and we got married in Israel July 15th. July 12th, 1965. And my oldest daughter, Sharon, was born July 15, 1966, a year later. And my daughter, Michelle, was born a year later on June 29, 1967. And then my daughter, Jackie, was born in 1970, December 1st, 1970. So those are the 3 daughters.
So you moved back to the United States with your husband?
Yeah, because he lived in the United States.
Let's just talk about him for a minute. He was born in Poland, and he was in a labor
Belarus, Poland.
And he was in a labor camp, or he was...
His father, he was born in 1939.
So he was hidden
somewhere? No, they lived in Koronitz. That was also occupied by the Germans. And one day, the German, he was, I think, maybe about 3 or 4 years old when the Germans came into the town. My father was part of the partisans, was going back and forth and working with the partisans.
At 4 years old?
My father-in-law, not my brother.
Your father-in-law.
My father-in-law.
Okay.
My father-in-law. My husband was staying with his mother. He was a young kid, he was with his mother.
Right.
Then one day, my father-in-law wasn't home, wasn't there in their house, when the Germans came in and they were rounding up the people. So my mother-in-law with my husband, with Jay, was 4 years old, they ran away, they hid in the hospital, because my mother-in-law was a nurse, so they hid in the hospital. Afterwards, they had to leave the hospital too, and they ran to a forest that was nearby. She couldn't run with my mother-in-law was a very pretty lady. She couldn't run with my husband. So after a while, she put him underneath a tree and covered him up with leaves. And she said to him, Yitzchak, his name was Yitzchak, you stay right here. I'm going to go and find your father and come back and save you, because I cannot take you with me now. And she ran away. She left my husband. He was there, he was very quiet, but after a while, she came back. A very short time after, she came back, and she took him, because she couldn't just survive without my husband. Meanwhile, the Germans came. They were running after the Jews to run away with the dogs. Now, the dogs can smell. There was a pond not far from where they were running away, and my mother-in-law and my husband immersed himself in that pond of water because the dogs cannot smell human beings in the water. And they stayed there for a while, and matter of fact, my husband froze his legs. He couldn't walk for a very long time, and he was getting money from the German restitution because, you know, he suffered from his legs through his whole life. He was a pretty big man, but his legs were that skinny. Somebody helped him, you know, they put all kind of leaves and all kind of things that you find in the forest to heal his bones. And they did, but he always, you know, suffered from his legs. Afterwards, they got reunited with my father-in-law, and they were in a DP camp after the liberation. They were in a DP camp in Germany called Eschwege. You heard of Eschwege? That was a DP camp. And they stayed there, my father and my mother, and now they wanted to come to the United States because my father-in-law had here a brother, but you couldn't come because you needed a visa. American government wasn't taking you in unless you could, you know, somebody can sponsor you. So they never came to the United States. But my father-in-law, Shimon Peres's father, was my father-in-law's uncle. My father-in-law's mother and Shimon Peres's father were brother and sisters. So Shimon Peres and my father-in-law were first cousins. So when my Shimon Peres's father found out about my in-laws being in the DP camp, he sponsored them, and they went to Israel. From the DP camp in Eschwege in Germany, they went straight to the United States. I mean, they went straight to Israel, sorry. They were sponsored by the uncle, and they lived in Israel. My father-in-law, he was a bookkeeper back in Poland, and when he went to Israel, he worked, because Shimon Peres's father was a builder, so he took my father-in-law in, and he was in the building, you know, construction. But then he met somebody, and somebody for Germany, and my father-in-law, he took some law courses, and he became a lawyer for the German restitution. My father-in-law was a lawyer, but he did not have the proper papers to practice law in Germany. So he had a partner that supplied all the papers for the German government, and he had about 10,000 customers.
10,000 what?
Customers.
Oh, really?
Up in the United States, because then they came in 1956. They came to the United States.
So your husband came to the United States
1956.
1956. And how old was he then?
If he was born in 1939.
So he's about 15 or 16 years old,
Right.
17 years old.
Yep. And he really didn't
With his
want to come.
parents?
With his parents, yeah.
Okay.
They came, and truthfully, I don't know whether I should say that. Maybe you should take that out. He came to the United States. He really didn't want to, but you know, that was supposed to be the 1956 war with the Egyptian. You know, with Nasser. He occupied the Suez Canal, and you know, I don't know if you know the story.
Yes.
They were attacked. Well, my husband was supposed to go to the army. Because they were rounding up, I think, even 16, 17 years old. So Shimon Peres told my father-in-law, you know, there's going to be a war very soon, and they're going to draft your son. Now, my husband was the only one son. He was the apple of his parents.
Right.
So it's like kind of, they lived in Tel Aviv, but in fact they lived in, they did very well in Israel. They lived in Tel Aviv in the same building where Golda Meir lived. And it was like they were here one day and left the next day. My father-in-law got together anything, whatever they had, and they went to the United States. So that's how they got to the United States to save my husband from the army. He always regretted it, of not having to come to the United States and not going to the army. And there was a time when he couldn't go to Israel because, you know, if you would go, they could catch you and ask you, you're 22, where is your papers, you know? Your army, you know, because you know when you go to the army, you have papers that you served, and you were dismissed or whatever. So for a while he didn't go, and then later on he did go. One time they caught him and he had to enlist in the army, but they let him out 24 hours later.
Why?
Because he was too old. You know?
He was still what?
Too old.
Oh, too old.
Too old already to serve in the army, you know.
He couldn't call up Shimon Peres and say, "Get me out of jail."
Well, it had to do with Shimon Peres also. You know, Shimon Peres's brother, he had a brother, Gershon Peres, that we were in very close connection. So yes, it had to do with him too, getting him out from the army.
Well, so you, when you come back from your wedding, now you're living where in New York?
In Westchester, in Rybrook. Well, actually, when we got married, the first time we lived in Riverdale in an apartment. 239 East, 239 on 239th Street. I don't remember exactly. At 239th Street in Riverdale. We lived there for a year, and then I was pregnant with my daughter Sharon, and my husband said, "That's no, you know, we're going to move to a house." So we bought a house in Rybrook, New York, in Westchester County, and we moved there when my daughter was born, and I lived in Rybrook from 1965-66, from 1966 till 1996. In 1996 I came to Florida, and we rented a place first right here on 18th Street, and then a year later we bought this house.
So when so as your children were growing up, were you taking them back to Israel when you went to visit?
Yes, oh yes, they went, instead of going to camp, we always spent the summer in Israel with my parents and my family, and yes, they got to know my mom and my dad, and then be very close up till now with my sisters and my nieces and nephews, and it's their best time when we go to Israel. It's the best time that
Why?
Because they love the family, they love the family, they love the freedom. They don't have any family. My husband was only one son, and he has only a cousin in New York, but which we are not in very good relationship with. So he didn't have anybody. I didn't have anyone. My sister Hannah got married and she moved to Poughkeepsie, and she had 4 children that were born in Poughkeepsie. So my children were very close to them, and they are close to them up till now. But whenever we go to Israel, it's like they don't want to come back. It's the people, it's the country, it's the relationship, the family, it's Shabbat, you know. I come from an observant family. We always go, you know, we stay in a hotel, we don't stay with the family because we're too many people and they've got, you know, they don't have enough room. But it's the Shabbat that they observe, and the singing and the food and the day of rest, and it's just my youngest daughter is thinking about, you know, going to Israel all together and living there. She was just now with me when I was in Israel also. She came to join me. She was with me for 10 days and really didn't want to come back. It's just this love that they have. It's our country. My children, they're Americans. They were born here, but they still feel that they are very close. Israel is their country, just like the way I feel. I mean, you know, I live here in the United States, but my heart is there. I was brought up there. My family's there. I still, when I get off the airplane in Lod, I always have tears, and I must have gone back to Israel tens of times. I mean, I don't know. Lately, the last several years since my husband passed away, I go 2-3 times a year to see my family, to make up for the years that I missed. Not being with them, not being with my mom and dad. And it's a very important country for me and life there. And,
what about your grandchildren? How do they feel?
Well, my grandchildren, all of them have been in Israel too. My oldest granddaughter, Samantha, who is 25 years old, she was in Israel already 3-4 times. She went with, one time she went with Nifty, on a teen tour. Then she went with the Birthright. Then she did the March of the Living, and she went to Israel. She went also when my youngest granddaughter, for my oldest daughter Sharon, was bat mitzvah. We all went to Israel. So Samantha must have been in Israel about 4 or 5 times at least. She could have, if she would go to Israel, she would have tried not to come back, and her parents know, so they don't send her. Because, you know, she loves that life. She's the type that would love, you know, when she went with the Birthright, she was in a digging and in a kibbutz, and she just loved that kind of life. That's the kind of girl she is. My second granddaughter, who is 23 years old now, she was in Israel also with the Birthright and with our trips. She was in Israel 2 or 3 times, but she loves Israel, but it's not for her. She would have moved to Israel. Wendy, my youngest granddaughter, is going now to Israel for 10 days. She's in Spain. She's in college and she's in Spain taking some courses. And when it's over, I think next week, she's going for 2 weeks to Israel because she loves Israel too. You see, my kids, my grandkids love the family. They love, even though they have cousins here from their fathers, but there is a different feeling that they have toward their cousins and their family in Israel. It's that warmth, that hospitality, that you yourself, you're free. You don't have to put up a show. You don't have to be careful what you say. You just go out. They love their interaction. They love life in Israel. They feel free. They are not. When we go to Israel, we're never worried about war or attack or anything. I was in Israel last time when they had, I think 2 years ago, when they had the Scots. Remember they sent, you know, when they had the dome,
the Iron Dome.
The Iron Dome.
Yes.
I stayed with my
rockets.
sister. I stayed with my sister in Rehovot, and my children kept calling me, "Mom, you gotta come home. You know, it's a war going on. You can't stay there." And I said, you know, I really can't come because I can't live my family here. They you know, they are being attacked and I'm going to go back to America. I mean, I can't do that. And they were very upset at me for not coming back. But I remember one night they were shelling, you know, in parts of Israel. My sister said to me, "Let's go to the movies." I said, "Should have gone to the movies." She says, "Yeah, why not? Let's go." And you know, Casey, we did go. And they were, I think it was like maybe an 11 or a 12 o'clock at night movie. And we did go and we did see, and there were other people too. And you know, we came home and we were fine. That's how life in Israel is. And my kids feel that too. My son-in-law went for the first time. He traveled the whole world, but he never wanted to go to Israel. But he did go when it was his daughter's bat mitzvah. And he really didn't want to go. He was waiting that something should happen so we wouldn't have to go. We could cancel the trip because he was afraid from the Arabs, from Gaza, from everything that's happening. He went with such a heavy heart. And when he got to Israel and we traveled, he couldn't get over it. What a beautiful country it is. How safe it is. When he came back, he became an advocate to his friends and telling them, "You got to go to Israel. There is no war there. I mean, everything is fine." Since then, he went back twice, and he really didn't want to go the first time. And he loves it too. He says that, you know, at one time he says if there is going to be something in the United States, he's going to run away to Cuba or the Caribbeans. But now he said, nope, he's got to go to Israel. If he will have to leave the United States, he's going to Israel. And he's an American that didn't want to go. So my other son-in-law has never been in Israel. He would like to go to Israel, but he didn't. My daughter wasn't. His children, as I said, all my grandkids were at least minimum 3 times up to 5-6 times. And my children went numerous times.
So is it your behest or is it your children that has, what's the reason for this desire to want to go to Israel on your grandchildren's part? Is it their parents? Or
All of it together. All of them. See, my husband was also Israeli.
Mm-hmm.
We at home, we spoke Hebrew. My children grew up with an Israeli culture, with an Israeli atmosphere in the house. While my kids were still home, we were observing Shabbat Friday night. It was a very important part of their life. When they were growing up, they always felt that their life was different than the rest of their friends in Rybrook. While everybody could go out on Friday, whenever early to go out and party, my kids could never go out. They had to wait. They would have Friday night dinner. Then my in-laws come, because every Friday night we had the gefilte fish and the chicken soup, and they had to stay till the end. And they weren't young. They were about 17 and 18 till they went to college. They had to stay home, They could go out only after. And the other thing was, all their friends they liked to come to our house because we had those 2 drawers full with goodies and junk. And they were Americans. You don't have a lot of junk in Americans' home. But we had a lot of junk because my husband was a survivor. He didn't have nothing what to eat. Didn't have nothing what to eat neither, but I was young. So he had to make sure that forever, till the day he died, we had to have a lot of junk, we had to have a lot of food, the refrigerator had to be stuffed till the top, whether you ate it or not, or threw it away after, didn't matter, it had to be stuffed. And my oldest daughter is the same thing, and my second one too. They stuffed the refrigerator. My son-in-laws always complain, look at this food, it's already here a whole month. If I don't clean up, it's going to stay another month. So they taken that after my husband. And matter of fact, because I lived in Israel under conditions that I didn't have too much food did not play a big part in my life. So before my husband died, he said that he has to fill up the refrigerator with food and the pantry with food and the freezer with meat and everything, because after he'll die, I'll probably eat up everything and never go to the supermarket and shop, because a piece of bread with butter is going to be enough for me. And if you go to my refrigerator, you'll see that there is nothing in it, just a few bottles of water, And my kids that came today here, they said, Mom, when are you going shopping? I said, I don't know, I don't need anything. I've got yogurt for breakfast, I'm going out tomorrow for dinner. Maybe I'll go to the club, I'm going to play cards, I'm going to go to, what do I need food for? And it's empty. And that's how I've been living. It's not, food is secondary in my life somehow.
When did your husband pass away?
Exactly today, 11 years ago, June 4th. And this is the first time that since he passed away, that his Jewish date of when he passed and his regular, it coincided. Mm-hmm. He died on Rosh Chodesh Sivan, because it's Shavuot before Shavuot, and today it's Rosh Chodesh also, so June 4th, 11 years ago. We went to the cemetery, and each time we go to the cemetery, we all tell my husband the stories. I mean, he's right next to his mom and dad. We tell them what happened to us and to the children and the progress on everybody. And then we always say, thank you very much that you made our life easy. And my father and my mother-in-law and my husband that worked pretty hard and made it, and gave us the possibility of live a good life and enjoy what we have. And I travel with my children, with my daughter. Every 2 years we take an overseas trip someplace. We are planning, God willing, now a trip to Morocco in October. So we always tell my husband and his parents, thank you very much that we have the money and the health to go and do it. And we are very grateful for everything that we have, my children included. They are very grateful I think they've got very good manners and values, Jewish values. And they're good people, and their kids and their husband, and I'm trying to be good too. You know.
So this is the special day then. Today.
Yeah, well, today, it's been a kind of a tough day, you know, for us all, But we managed, and we did okay, and everybody went home, and we're looking for the future, for good things.